The letter arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I remember the moment clearly because nothing about that day felt unusual until I opened the envelope. The HOA letterhead sat proudly at the top of the page, bold and official. Underneath it were 3 paragraphs that made absolutely no sense. According to the notice, starting next month, I will be required to pay $150 per month in garage rental fees. I stared at the page for a long time, convinced I had misunderstood something. Rental fees for my garage? The same garage attached to my house. The same garage that had been listed in my property deed. The same garage I had parked my truck in every single day since I bought the place. At first, I laughed. It had to be a mistake. Maybe they meant the guest parking garages near the clubhouse. Maybe the letter was sent to the wrong address. But when I flipped to the second page, the message became crystal clear. All garages within the HOA jurisdiction are classified as community-managed storage units and are subject to monthly rental fees. My house number was printed right there. So was a warning underneath. Failure to comply would result in daily fines and possible liens placed on my home. That was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't a mistake. The HOA was dead serious. And they were trying to charge me rent for something I already owned. I bought my house 11 years ago. It sits in a quiet suburban neighborhood with neat sidewalks, trimmed hedges, and the kind of HOA rules you expect. Lawn height, trash bins, paint colors. Nothing unusual. When I signed the closing paperwork, the property description was very clear. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, attached 2-car garage. The garage wasn't some shared structure across the street. It was literally part of the house. You could walk into it from my kitchen. Over the years, I turned it into more than just a parking space. One side held my truck. The other side had shelves for tools, a workbench, and a freezer. I replaced the door opener, installed new lighting, even painted the interior. Everything about it was mine. Or at least, I thought it was. For most of the decade I lived there, the HOA barely bothered me, until a new board took over. And with it came Carla Whitmore, the HOA president. Carla Whitmore moved into the neighborhood about 3 years ago. Within 6 months, she was running the HOA board. She had a very particular style of leadership. Rules were her favorite weapon. Grass half an inch too tall? Fine. Trash invisible from the street? Warning letter. Mailbox paint slightly faded? Citation. Most people in the neighborhood tolerated it because the fines were small and fighting the HOA was a headache. But Carla had a reputation. She loved power. And she loved reminding people that she had it. The garage rental scheme was her biggest idea, yet about a week after I received the letter, the HOA held a neighborhood meeting at the clubhouse. I decided to attend. The room was packed with confused homeowners holding identical letters. Carla stood at the front with a presentation slide behind her. The title read, Community Garage Optimization Program. I wish I were joking. Carla explained the plan like she was unveiling a brilliant innovation. According to her, the HOA board had determined that garages were technically structures within community zoning oversight. Therefore, they would now be considered community-managed parking units, which meant residents would need to rent them back from the HOA. Someone in the audience raised their hand. Wait, we already own our garages. Carla smiled politely. That's a common misunderstanding. Another homeowner stood up. My deed says the garage is part of my property. Carla clicked to the next slide. It's about community governance, not individual ownership. That's when I knew something wasn't right, because Carla wasn't explaining a rule. She was trying to redefine reality that I ignored the first payment request. 30 days later, another letter arrived. This one was less friendly. It listed $150 unpaid rent and $50 in late penalties. At the bottom was a warning. If the balance reached $500, the HOA would begin lien proceedings against my property. I called the HOA office. The receptionist transferred me to Carla. Her voice was calm, almost cheerful. Hello, how can I help you? I received a bill for garage rent, I said. Yes, she replied. That's correct. I'm not paying rent for my own garage. She paused for a moment, then her tone changed. Well, if you choose not to comply, fines will continue to accumulate. You can't charge rent for property I own. Our legal team disagrees. That line told me everything. Carla thought she had the law on her side, or at least she wanted everyone to believe that. Over the next 2 weeks, I talked to neighbors. What I learned shocked me. Several homeowners had already started paying the fee, not because they believed it was legal, but because they were afraid of HOA liens. One older couple told me they'd been paying for 6 months. Another neighbor had paid nearly $900. That's when the situation stopped being ridiculous and started being serious. Because if Carla was wrong, she wasn't just abusing power. She was running a massive illegal cash grab. That I'm not the type to panic, but I am the type to research. The first thing I did was pull my property deed from the county website. It clearly listed Lot 47, including residential structure and attached garage. Then I checked the county zoning records. Same description. Then I requested the HOA governing documents. Buried inside hundreds of pages of bylaws was a section on shared spaces, pools, clubhouse, guest parking. Garages were never mentioned. Not once. So I went one step further. I pulled original construction permits from when the neighborhood was built. Each house blueprint clearly labeled the garage as part of the private residence. That was the moment I realized something important. Carla wasn't misinterpreting the rules. She was inventing new ones and charging people money for them. Daniel suggested a strategy. Instead of immediately filing a lawsuit, we would document everything. Every letter, every fine, every homeowner who had been charged. Within 2 weeks, we had a list. 23 residents had paid garage rent. The total collected so far, over $18,000. Daniel shook his head. That's serious. Then he asked me a question. Are you comfortable going public? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Daniel contacted a local investigative reporter. 3 days later, a news van parked outside the neighborhood entrance. The reporter interviewed several homeowners. One woman held up her payment receipts. They told us we'd lose our homes if we didn't pay. Another neighbor said he thought the rule must be legal. Why else would the HOA demand it? The reporter then asked me about my garage. I walked her to my house, opened the garage door, and showed her the deed paperwork. This structure is legally part of my property, I explained, but the HOA says I have to rent it. She looked stunned. That sounds questionable. The news segment aired 2 nights later. The headline said, HOA accused of charging residents rent for garages they own. The story spread fast. Phones started ringing at the HOA office. Neighbors who hadn't paid yet suddenly refused. And the next morning, I found Carla standing in my driveway. She looked furious. You went to the media, she said. You threatened liens on my house. This is an internal HOA matter. No, I replied calmly. It's a legal matter. Her voice sharpened. You're creating unnecessary drama. I held up my property deed. You're charging people rent for property they already own. She crossed her arms. Our attorneys approved the policy. That sentence would come back to haunt her. The news story caught the attention of someone important. The county property records office. 2 days later, inspectors visited the HOA office. They requested financial records and board meeting minutes. Word spread to the neighborhood instantly. People started comparing letters and fines. And suddenly Carla's authority didn't feel so powerful anymore. The board called an emergency meeting. The clubhouse was packed. Carla stood at the podium again, but this time she looked nervous. She tried to reassure everyone. The situation has been misunderstood. A homeowner raised his hand. Then why did you charge us money? Another person asked, why did you threaten liens? Carla struggled to answer. That's when Daniel stood up. My lawyer had come with me. He calmly placed a stack of documents on the table. County records confirm these garages are private property. Then he added one more line. Continuing to collect rent could expose the board to legal liability. The room went silent. Within a week, everything fell apart for Carla. The county issued a formal notice stating the HOA had no authority to classify garages as community property. The board's legal advisor quietly withdrew support. Homeowners demanded refunds. And suddenly the HOA that once threatened everyone was now the one facing consequences. A month later, every homeowner received a letter. It was much shorter than the original one. It stated that the garage rental program had been terminated. It also included refund checks. Thousands of dollars were returned to residents. But the biggest change happened at the next HOA election. 3 board members lost their positions, including Carla. A few weeks after the election, I saw Carla packing boxes into a moving truck. She avoided eye contact. I stood in my driveway with the garage door open, my truck parked exactly where it had always been, right where it belonged. No rent, no fines, just my garage, my property, my rules. Some people join HOAs to protect neighborhoods. Others join for power. But sometimes, all it takes is one homeowner with the truth to remind them who really owns the property. And in my case, that garage was never for rent.